Hi everyone, so today we continue our discussion on Jesus in India. It is possible that maybe 15, maybe 17 years before actually Jesus became a spiritual master, he spent all that years in India. Basically nothing new about this message, because starting with the end of 19th century, many authors and esoteric gurus and mystics keep on discussing and proclaiming this message, this information, that Jesus really received his spiritual education in India and especially in Himalayas. The first author, the first guy who actually published a very famous book was Russian journalist Nicholas Notovich. Mr. Notovich, he went to Himalayas, it was 1887, and he visited a Buddhist monastery of Himis, and somehow masters, gurus of that Buddhist monastery, they just gave him this manuscript with information, stories about Jesus in India, and that was 2000 years old book. Originally this manuscript written in Pali language, then later on translated into Tibetan, but somehow lamas, gurus of that monastery in Ladakh area of Kashmir, in the mountains, they didn't give the master copy to Notovich, but they let him to translate it they itself in the monastery, and he brought back to the West this translation. According to that book, which Notovich later on published in France, and later on in England and the United States, Jesus spent something like 15 years in India and Himalayas, learning philosophy and meditation from different sources, mainly Vedic Hindu, spiritual pilgrimage centers, and Buddhist monasteries. And actually many other Western authors and esoteric teachers, they support this really unusual idea that Jesus actually brought the message to the Palestine, to Jerusalem, actually from India and Himalayas. But in this video I wish to discuss another kind of possibility, that Jesus didn't die on the cross, and actually somehow he escaped and went back to India, and he spent next maybe 40 or 50 years again in that area of Kashmir. And actually we have even Jesus' tomb in Kashmir, and some people proclaim that Jesus' relics, Jesus' tomb is really in Srinagar. It's a very north state of Kashmir. It's North India. Of course, according to the Orthodox Christian vision, it's absolutely impossible. But at the same time, impossible and even sinful. But at the same time, I think it is very good and very important to try to know more about life of Jesus, just because if we know more about his life, it means we have a chance to understand better his message. So it's interesting that when Jesus was born, according to the canonical Gospels, 3 kings, 3 sages from East came to worship him, to see him, and that was very strange. Actually, mostly, no church can explain to you the meaning of that, but at the same time, who knows, maybe that sages from India, Himalayas, they just came to witness reincarnation of the great master, and who knows, maybe when Jesus became a teenager, the same sages came back and took him to Himalayas to teach Jesus, as the great messengers of Himalayan Mahatmas. Well, but let us come back to the possibility that Jesus didn't die on the cross. Well, we have information, historical information, facts that people at that time, first century, could die only after 2 or 3 days after they were crucified. Well, we may easily suppose that after disciples brought the Jesus far away from Roman soldiers, he could come back to the normal consciousness, or come back from the divine some state, and actually that's the beginning of that possibility that actually he was not dead. And then the question is, to stay longer in Palestine, on the territory of the Roman Empire, was dangerous. The question is where to go to feel oneself safe enough. If you just take the map of ancient world, well, it's impossible to go to South France or to England, because all that lands were part of Roman Empire. So the people who suppose that Jesus could go to the South France after he survived crucifixion, well, it's very unlogical and unlikely. I think that the greatest chance that Jesus could go back to India, first of all, that was really far away from Roman Empire, so the safe place to stay for him. And the second reason, that was land which he knew pretty well, because he was learning meditation and philosophies exactly in that, India and Himalayas. So that was the perfect choice. Okay, according to the different sources, opinions, and honestly speaking, just rumors, he passed away in the age of 85, just approximately. It means that he was alive, next 40 to 50 years, and he was staying in North India, in Kashmir. And that's how we have a tomb in Srinagar city, and quite many esoteric people and even some scientists ready to suppose that that tomb in Srinagar actually is a tomb of Jesus. Okay, there are two actually relics, there are two tombs inside that building, and one of them, let us call it first one, which can be Jesus one, and the second one is more or less we're sure that that's not Jesus, because it's tomb of one Islamic Sufi saint who lived just few centuries back. But the first tomb in that building is a very special one. First of all, of course, nobody knows whose relics are there. But even according to local Islamic leaders, religious leaders, this is the tomb of certain prophet or mystic who came from Palestine or Israel, and he was basically Jewish, and he came in the 1st century. So, it doesn't mean that this mystic or this prophet was exactly Jesus. But at the same time, it's interesting that first century Jewish mystic who came to Kashmir area and just became a spiritual master for the local people, and that's how it's happened that they have his tomb and relics. You know, for most of the Christians, the fact of crucifixion, the resurrection of Jesus is the main point of Christian religion. But at the same time, let me repeat that for most of the Christians and not for all Christians. For example, for me, there is no any contradiction to suppose that Jesus received his spiritual education in India, spent there something like 15 years learning philosophy and meditation, and for me personally, it's not a great problem if he didn't die on the cross and somehow escaped Roman, people, Roman soldiers, and after this crucifixion he went back to India and spent there another 40 or 50 years. For me as the Christian, let me repeat, I am Christian, this information, this possibility doesn't mean that I respect and worship Jesus less. And by the way, I think that to be Christian doesn't mean that we have to deny, for example, Vedic and Buddhist scriptures. Not at all. I think that it's very useful actually for the Christians to read Upanishads and Bhagavad Gita and Buddhist scriptures as well. Okay, for me the main, the fundamental part of Jesus' teaching is the first of all is direct connection between people and God, man and God, without any betweeners. And if you read New Testament, actually the Jesus message is absolutely clear. He never spoke about necessity of betweeners. His message was direct meditation and prayer to the God. One more huge message from the New Testament, which is absolutely obvious for me, is that actually man and God are not separate. And the oneness of divine consciousness, divine nature, reality, and human nature, that's clear message of the Jesus which we can read just in canonical Gospels. And of course, love and compassion. That's the huge, the most important message of the Jesus. And actually, we have to love ourselves first, then we have to love God, and then neighbors. And let me repeat, guys, that we have to start with the love to ourselves. Because if you hate yourself, you can't be devoted to God. First, you have to love and respect yourself, then only there is a chance that you can be good, devoted to God, and really helpful for the people around you. Okay, if we speak about the essence of Jesus' teaching, in a sense, direct prayer and meditation, direct contact with God, then if we speak about that really God is inside us, and then the message of love and compassion, then actually no contradiction if we can suppose and even accept the fact, the information that Jesus received his spiritual education in India, and who knows, maybe even spent second half of his life there back in India. I want to say that I myself personally believe, that's my, if you wish, intuitive feeling, that Jesus really died on the cross. and he came back to life later on, and actually he met disciples according to the gospel in a new divine body, and then he physically went to the Lord. And basically the original classical message of the New Testament is the one in which I believe. But I think that we have to be open to any possibility anyway, and to any concept and idea, because if we wish to know truth, it means we have to be open to any suggestions, to any ideas, and let us discuss them, let us analyze them, and let us consider just at least possibility about that. For me as the Christian, the Jesus Christ and his message and his meaning, spiritual meaning for human culture is not less after I'm ready to accept the idea that he actually was learning Vedic and a Buddhist philosophy and way of meditation. For me, his message is not diminishing just because of that. More we know about his life, actually more we can understand his message, because when we take the New Testament philosophy, it's very easy to see huge difference between New Testament and Old Testament approach to spirituality and philosophy. And how can we explain that? Easily, because Jesus actually brought his teaching from Himalayas, from Vedic and Buddhist sources. That's the reason why New Testament philosophy is hugely different from the Old Testament. Of course, we as the Christians, or we as the just spiritual seekers, we have to respect both Old and the New Testament, but still, the difference is there, and explanation is also very clear. Okay, God bless you. See you next time.